Alrighty. So welcome back. We're finally back after how long? I mean, it's not long for you guys because you might have just listened to an old episode. But now we're back. We're going to talk today about one of my favorite books of all time, and a newbie for Swader, and that is, what is it, Swader?
It is from a young English writer named Jane Austen. It's called Pride and Prejudice.
Young in meaning 19th century.
Yeah.
It's okay. She's super famous. This is one of the most sold romance books of all time. Over 20 million copies sold. Fun facts.
Yeah.
And it has been adapted more than I think almost any other romance story, in my opinion. But specifically, we're going to be going over the 2005 movie adaptation of this book. Although there are dozens, including Bollywood adaptations that you can, explore on your own time. But we're just going to go over the more famous, more recent movie from 2005. Yeah. Let's get rolling.
Get pumping.
So because I have seen this movie, according to my conversation with my mother this morning, at least 5 times a year for the last 20 years. I've seen this movie a lot. But it was your first time seeing this movie, correct?
No, I'd seen the movie before, but quite a long time ago. I think not too long after it had come out in 2005.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Much long time. And you've never read the book.
This is my first reading of Pride and Prejudice or any of Jane Austen's work. This is my first Jane Austen.
Nice. The first Austen.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. This is actually Jane Austen's second book. Her first book is Sense and Sensibility, which we might do at another time, but I actually prefer her second novel. So this is really fun for me. There's a couple of caveats for this, I think, because there are so many adaptations, right? Those may come into play. We may mention them. You can go into your own in-depth exploration, but
yeah,
we'll be doing this direct comparison, and we'll not be comparing this movie to other adaptations. It is strictly book to 2005.
Yeah. I do have, I'll have an interesting comment, or terrible, I don't know, I could be an idiot, but to make at the end just about a couple of different variations that I dipped into. But otherwise, yeah, this will definitely be the focus. Okay,
so let's get rolling. As always, there are going to be spoilers. If you've never watched, read, or have any interest in doing this on your own time and don't want spoilers, you should probably stop this now and come back later. But for the moment, let's get rolling.
Yeah.
So logline, Swader, what's your logline for this?
The middle child of a barely stable English country family navigates social mores and airless customs as she realizes her affection for Mr. Darcy.
Nice. Mine would be a young woman explores herself within the confines of a restrictive society and starts to realize that a book is not always the same as its cover. First impressions are not always the right impression. So it's a big theme throughout this guy.
Yeah.
Well, we start. Where do we start? Would you want to go plot and then plot devices or characters?
I think we go plot.
Okay.
Because I think that's it's such an important it's such an important facet of the novel. It's such a densely plotted piece of writing.
Oh yeah.
Quite intentionally. And I think that's, like, for me, that was the best way that I could access it, because there's just so much activity to it.
There's so much, and it's like a little under 300 pages long. I haven't read it, but I've also listened to it. The audiobook is quite long. So yeah, it's dense, which is fascinating because she had to handwrite 300 pages.
That's right.
And there has been some pages found from other, iterations of the story. And according to family lore, she redid this one a lot. She probably wrote an entire forest worth of paper.
Yeah.
From just this book.
Absolutely.
Which I find fascinating. For the plot, though, we start at the homestead, or the small town, where the Bennets, who are the main character family of Elizabeth Bennet and her whole brood, live. So we get a pretty good picture of where they're at, who they are.
A picturesque long-born estate near
Hertfordshire. The Hertfordshire state. This is actually one of the biggest differences for me from the movie to the book.
Yeah.
So the book, I think, has a bigger plot setup to the small town.
Yeah.
Versus, again, as always, movies only have 2 hours. This is 300 pages.
You got to make choices.
Yeah. So plot device wise, I think the movie did a better job at displaying it visually, which I'll reiterate this at the end. I think this book was made to be a movie in a time when movies were not a thing.
That's interesting.
Like, I think if the movies were an option, Jane Austen would be a screenwriter.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And that comes out a lot in the first plot points of the book.
Yeah.
Like, she writes everything so extensively. She builds such a big picture.
The exposition is quite clear.
The exposition, the stakes, is so clear. Yeah. And it has one of the most famous first lines besides Moby Dick of all time.
Yeah.
Which is like, is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
Yeah.
And that really sets the tone for the society in which they live, the impression of the people in that society within the plot moving forward. So what do you think about the first act plot wise setup?
I think it's really exciting to read because so 30,000 years ago, I was a history major in college. And the best part of studying history in that format at that level is that you spend a lot of time on primary source documents because you want to get as close as you can to the individuals who lived as opposed to the published histories of like the crown. The church will write things and those can be valuable and important, but like you want to get as close as you can to the individual experience. And Pride and Prejudice feels like an historical document that is very clearly discussing and satirizing the institution of marriage in Georgian England. And what a trade it is, because these are professions. Any emotional consideration is a secondary concern. And so what this book sets up and what Jane Austen sets up so spectacularly and so specifically is what a rule book has to be navigated in all of these complicated relationships. And they set the stakes with Collins. They set the stakes with their little dowager estate that's hanging on by a thread merely because her father, Mr. Bennet, is still alive. Like,
oh, yeah, there's definitely the setup of like what a love match could look like.
Yeah.
That is the Bennets.
Yeah.
Which not in the greatest of circumstances. They got married for love. They had a lot of daughters, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
And now they're in this situation. And I think the undertone for the beginning of that setup for the Bennets is love match isn't the right thing to do. And so the whole book we're like, people are searching for love matches, but in the back of the Bennett's mind, it's like, well, we had a love match and look how that turned out.
Yeah.
So like, is that really what you want?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, she does a great job of navigating, like, I think I saw somebody said it was like a novel of manners.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're just going around in the constructs and no one really veers off.
Yeah.
And when they do, it's scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And I think what's so excellent about her writing is that she is very aware of what she's discussing, and she is writing it the way you would write a set of rules. I remember reading I don't know why this jumped out to me exactly, but it was in college. I read what was essentially a training manual for Prussian soldiers, because Prussia was the first one to really raise an army the way you train it, as rigidly as we understand and as focused as we'd understand. And the rigidity of it and the specificity of the rules. You were to do this now. This is a motion that you do when you're doing this exercise. Eerily parallels how she discusses what's going on with these people, and how people like later on, like Catherine de Bourgh talks about like what's expected and what young women should go through and experience. Like the rigidity of it is like, it's very funny.
It's funny. Yeah.
And she knows that. I mean, she knows what she's doing.
She knows what she's doing. And she's been tapped as one of the biggest feminist writers of all time as well. And I think there's a reason for that, especially because of the society in which they were living in.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if she would have written this book outside of that time frame, if she wouldn't be considered a feminist. Looking at it from the modern gaze, on the surface, not really. But when you think about where they were, then yes.
Yeah.
Because all the women in the book and the movie follow that construct.
Yeah.
They follow that rigidity that you mentioned, that they follow the army-like society. They don't veer off. And if they veer off, it's scandal. We'll get into the scandal part of it as well.
Yeah.
But I think from our perspective, she is a feminist because they're talking about, free will, free choice, free everything, even in the beginning of the first act. But back in the day, do you think she would have been considered one?
It's an interesting idea. I think certainly as a person in thought, she strikes me as someone who would have been. But I also think there's such a relative quality to a lot of these ideas where you operate to the extent that you think is the most forward for the time, and that eventually something else will happen that you will consider way too forward, because that's the way people operate. It's the way that we are so uncomfortable with things that we set into certain patterns in certain ways. But I think in the context of someone who was stuck in this society, in this system, I think probably yes. I think in the sense that like you are trying to maximize the benefit of an individual within a system is at least a kind of proto-feminism. This notion that like, well, there is inherently an unfairness in how this operates. There is inherently a structure that encourages thoughtlessness and deep unhappiness, and that there's something wrong with that, and it specifically seems to target women.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree. It's subtle. I think for the beginning, I mean, a lot of men have read this book. You're a man.
Sure.
Yeah. But even back then, a lot of the population wasn't so like, oh, this is a romance novel, only women are reading it. Like when it first came out, like men were reading it too.
Yeah.
And I think because of the subtle undertones of women have no choice, but again, they knew that. They live in a society where they knew they didn't have a choice. So she's pointing it out. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But I think she does a great job of subtly putting in like, yeah, it's bad, but it's worse than you think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really built up a lot coming into the second act when they're interacting more with higher up society, quote.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're at the Bennett's homestead. I did a lot of veering off there. I apologize. Where do we go next? What's the next plot point?
Well, so in the story we find we're introduced to their place near Hertfordshire, but then the plot motivates these characters by introducing Mr. Bingley, mm-hmm. Who is keeping a house for the season
to let,
and arrives with the Mr. Darcy, and as well as Caroline Bingley, and they announce they're hosting a social event. They're holding a ball. And the Bennets are invited. And so we are first introduced to London society, and something that's, or in, for Darcy, Pemberley. Yeah, Pemberley. But of the sort of higher up, more social order of things is introduced to sort of English country life. And we're given our first sense of the clash of style and culture that we see.
So that was a huge difference between the book and the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So the book they hosted, and the movie, country.
Yeah.
It was a country ball.
Yeah.
And I think that they go to a country ball in the book later on, like in the second act. And I think they just cut out all of that exposition and put it right into the first ball.
Yeah.
To save time. And I think it worked. Because then you got a full outward first impression disdain, quote, from the upper echelons to country folk when they walk in.
Yeah.
It was more impactful, I think.
There's Caroline Bingley's line in the movie about the idea that they'll be asked to chase a pig at any minute. A pig will be produced, they'll be asked to chase it. Like, Yeah, it's very much a city mouse, country mouse situation we're seeing here.
Yeah. And the movie does a better job, I think, of condensing this section than the book does. The book is it's pretty drawn out. It has a lot more character exposition because she has to describe everybody versus we just see them in the background.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get a ball, we get introduced to the upper echelons, but are they really upper echelon people?
Well, I think they certainly see themselves in that light because of their adherence to social custom. I think that they would more. You find out later with Catherine de Bourgh that there's always somebody like higher up.
Oh yeah,
and that's the thing here is that they're more elevated than the Bennets and this small town. But they're still trying to establish their own heirs because there's always the constant question of like, is this person presenting themselves in relationship to their estate? Is this an appropriate demonstration of pride or some other quality in relation to their estate? So I think they are still in a state of self-consciousness relative to like de Bourgh or somebody higher up than that in British aristocracy.
It's like if you worked at a department store and your manager is the head honcho at the store, but then the regional manager comes and you're like, oh, that's more important than this low-time manager. And it was fascinating because in the book, Jane Austen does a bigger chunk of describing that the Bingleys are new money. There's like 5 pages.
The nouveau riche,
Nouveau riche. They're the new money. They got their money in trade. They have the money.
Yeah.
They still deserve the respect, but they're, at least Bingley's heir is not as, I think that's why he's portrayed more as like a silly, like go-lucky kind guy.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't born fully into the money. Like he's
a bit of a himbo,
He's a bit of a himbo, yeah. So like he had enough, I think, experience. I would never say that he was at the stature of some of the people, like the lower class people.
Yeah.
But he had a better understanding, and I think that's why he's more like happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
Versus Darcy is landed gentry. Like he doesn't have a title, but he is the nephew of an earl. You know, like he is related closely to like Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
Yeah.
Related closely to the aristocracy.
Well, they see his estate later on, and it's so. It is so stately, and it is you can tell the difference between a very lovely home that someone purchased and an estate that feels like a landmark.
Oh yeah,
which is
even
what,
from like Bingley's to Let in Hertfordshire to Pemberley's, especially why I think it's a great visual representation. Like the adaptation visually for the 2005 version, just one image took 15 pages into one image.
Yeah.
Well,
actually, one of my favorite shots in the movie is when Elizabeth is looking at the art. She's surveying the sculpture, and she's really focused on that one piece of sculpture where someone sculpted the detail of like a veil, of like a light fabric veil. And I remember I saw that, and the movie directs your eye there, and it becomes the focal point. And then Elizabeth walks into that, and it's such an immersive thing of like, this is such a breathtaking piece of art that we all knew that was going to be the focus of the shot going in. And it gives you a sense of this is someone brought up to appreciate art in the patrician sense, culture in the patrician sense, which is very different than what Bingley possesses.
Oh, yeah. Not in a bad way.
Just a fact of their lives, I got
to reiterate that every time I see this movie, that veil shot, I'm like, how the heck?
Spectacular.
Did they do that?
The movie in general is gorgeous.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's breathtaking.
People harp a lot on how it's not to the book enough.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to the plot, I'm going to actually have to disagree. I think that it takes the bones of the plot of a 300 book and condenses it wonderfully. I think that the movie was a great adaptation in the sense that it was the story, not the in-depth story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's shown a lot in the second act. So we are meeting all of the new characters. We see a romance budding between one of the sisters, Jane, eldest, with Mr. Bingley, and her mother. In both versions, does a beautiful thing of like, oh, I'm going to go dine with Caroline, right? it's gonna rain, take the horse.
You're right.
Yeah. But mama, and then she gets sick, and obviously she has to stay.
Very comically, immediately she gets there.
She gets sick. And in the book, it's a little bit more drawn out. There's like, she's not doing well. Check in with her tomorrow. It takes Elizabeth about a week.
Yeah. For
her to go visit. And then the movie does that, but it does it better. Just time cuts it. You know, it doesn't show everything from the week.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you need it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here is where I think this was a fascinating adaptation to watch, because I love the book. I love what Jane Austen accomplishes with the book, and which is a much more serious, pointed satire and prod and dissection of her world and the social structure that she operates in. It was at first overwhelming, but then eventually incredible to read when you remember that big tapestry of what she's doing is so important. So it has a very different effect than the movie, which is instead, and I don't mean this as a critique, it's a melodrama. They condensed a pretty pointed surgical consideration of British society, and what they found in it was the melodramatic aspects of the story. And it is weird because the condensation does change that tone dramatically. Mm-hmm. And the screenwriters make decisions that accompany that. Like, and I'll mention it later as we get closer to the end, but they make specific choices that seem designed to relate to more modern sensibilities about love and what the outcome should be. And so this is where I don't think condensing this was a bad thing, but I think in condensing it is fundamentally different in tone and focus.
Definitely in tone, and definitely with the 2005 version, specifically the tone, because there's a bunch of other ones that try and get the bones and they do it different. There's romantic comedies, there's the miniseries, there's Bollywood, there's all the different kinds.
Yeah.
The 2005 version is slow.
Yeah.
Like the shots are slow. They're more intentional, which brings that melodrama aspect to it.
Oh, and visually, it's like Joe Wright and Roman Austen, I believe, is a cinematographer. It's gorgeous. It is like the long drawn out shots, the wafting. There's some fun steady cam work in the beginning.
Yeah, the hand shots.
Yeah. But then also a lot of like 1970s independent cinema framing. There's a great shot of Mr. Collins talking to Mrs. Bennet for the first time about the daughters, cattle trading the daughters. Tom Hollander as Collins is just unbelievably good.
He's so good. And we'll go into each in-depth character comparison. Yeah. But yeah, that moment is also a turning point in the second act of like, oh, this guy could save my family. So that's the mom's motivation versus the daughter's motivation.
Yeah. And the camera work reflects that in a fascinating way. It's everything, the action of the rest of the party is in the foreground. They're in the background, they're in the foreground. And it's very simple, very clean shot, some focus work but it's very 70s sort of camera work. Like they know what they were doing, and they knew that if you're going to make a melodrama, then it's going to look different.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think would direct or create the more satirical, more true to source material adaptation in a movie, not a TV series? Because TV series has 8 hours to play.
Yeah.
Movie.
Hold on. I actually had a thought about this. And Armando Iannucci.
Okay.
Armando Iannucci, I think he is so good at crafting really funny dialogue around a pretty straightforward situation. Like Veep, I think, is an incredible example of this. Death of Stalin, another of his films, and one of my favorite comedies in the last 10 years.
It'll be interesting.
I think he'd be interesting.
Yeah. I don't think he would take it full into the comedy realm because other people have done that. I don't think you need to do that. I think it needs to be more subtle.
Yeah.
And I think
he'd strike the right tone.
Yeah.
I also think Greta Gerwig could do an interesting job, because I think she does demonstrate Little Women is a very different story than this. It's America and in the Civil War era. Like, it's just different. But she's good at updating those speech patterns and that dialogue to a modern audience in a way that doesn't sacrifice anything. And so she could be interesting.
I think the screenplay from Greta Gerwig would be better. I don't think I would like her directing style.
Maybe, yeah.
Or that, because for Little Women, the dialogue was the highlight for me.
Yeah.
The visuals weren't anything special.
They were much more basic.
Yeah, they were more basic. And I think this could work as a more basic, like, not so dramatic and beautiful. It could work more simply. But that's also why I like the play version too.
Sure.
The play is like amazing. If you've ever seen it,
this would be an excellent play.
It is a great play.
If you knew how to cut it just right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it cuts off all the fat, but keeps it satirical because you don't have the visuals. You only have the dialogue.
Yeah.
How do you manifest a visual on a stage with the same impact?
Yeah.
So I think the play is a great version of it. But back to Act 2.
Yeah.
All right. So we're Mr. Collins. So Mr. Collins is the cousin who's going to inherit because in the entail for the society, women don't inherit property. They don't really inherit money unless they're dowries that are handed from the mother's side. Those transfer. But for the Bennets, everything is going to go to Mr. Collins.
Mm-hmm.
And this sniveling preacher comes to visit them, and he determines he's going to marry one of them because second cousins at that time marrying is not like an issue, right?
There's a great line actually that I have that I wanted to mention because I just think it's so funny. Later on, Catherine de Bourgh says, "Have you not heard him say that from his earliest hours he was destined for his cousin?" And that's just a thing that somebody says, and it's completely normal.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. When it comes to like who's going to marry who's going to keep, that's why they're all inbred. That's why they're all And it's funny because they don't see what we see, all the blood disorders and the birth defects, because they're too close to it,
Well, God said that's how it worked, so
yeah. Fates are falling asleep again. So we have another man come into the picture that's completely different than the men you've seen so far. We've seen high society men, we've seen middle society people, and then we see Mr. Collins, who is so in love with the higher ups.
Yeah.
He's what I would describe as a kiss ass.
Yeah.
The way he talks about de Bourgh is so funny, so floridly.
He is just up her butt about everything. Can I sit on this pillow?
Oh, please. For listeners at home, we had to craft a last minute recording situation at my place, and it's not optimal yet. It's not optimized.
We almost didn't record because his mics were not doing something good.
We're coming back, folks.
I also had surgery 2 weeks ago, so my arm is like it's swaying. I'm trying to adjust. I got to sleep in a bed for the first time last night. It was exciting. Now we're talking about one of my favorite books.
Yeah.
So we have Mr. Sniveling Collins man, and he comes to visit the Bennets in search of a wife. He sets his eyes on Jane because Jane is supposed to be the most beautiful out of all of them. She's the eldest. She's the most beautiful, but the mom kind of shoots that down because she knows Jane's prospects are a little bit better.
She's on back order.
She's been reserved, so
She's on layaway.
She's on layaway. That car's been bought. They're going to pick it up later. And so her mother pushes Elizabeth on Mr. Collins because what other prospects does she have? This is probably the best prospect she would have, and it would also save the family.
Yeah.
So it's like a familial responsibility comes into play, and I think that the book does a little bit of a better job of the conflict in that whole situation than the movie, because the movie's like, fuck no, I'm not marrying him.
Yeah. Well, it's like a first person, it's such an intense first person narrative that with I think maybe a couple of very small deviations, but it's almost like George and Lady Fight Club, where it's just like, here's a million facts coming out about you. Some of these are going to seem ridiculous because they are. Yeah. And I'm just going to get through it. Like and that's where her discussion of the mom, she is such, in the movie, because again, they're trying to hit a certain tone, she's a much more sympathetic figure than she is in the book. In the book, they make it quite clear that like, it's the Arrested Development meme about Job. She's like, I love all my children equally. And later it's like, I don't care for Joe. Like, that is 100% her relationship with Elizabeth Bennet. Like,
100%.
to a T.
I think because Elizabeth is probably the most headstrong.
Yeah.
Out of all of the...
She's her father's daughter.
All the 5 daughters, yeah. And it's funny because she's most like her father.
Yeah.
But with a notable exception, she has enough self-awareness. She's the most self-aware out of everybody.
Yeah.
Which is funny because she's really not.
Yeah.
Like, for society, she's more self-aware. Like, you were making a fool of yourself.
Well, we're often a terrible observant of our own behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, unfortunately.
One of the main things that she says even in the book is she's like, I prided myself on my discernment of others' character.
Yeah.
But then she said, but I was so clouded and jaded to my own.
Yeah.
And the mom is a prime example where she's like, her mom's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Her mom is outwardly embarrassing herself. And everyone has those family members and those people. And you're like, their reactions are making me blush and want to walk away.
Yeah.
And when her mom throws Mr. Collins on her, she's like, no, I'm not going to marry a ridiculous man. He's ridiculous. And I don't care if I'm a spinster. Fuck you.
Yeah. Well, and that's when her dad comes in clutch. And he's just like, well, you run the risk of alienating one of your parents. Like, if you don't marry him, you'll never see your mom again. If you do, you'll never see me again. Like,
yeah. And of course, she's like, well, I don't want to see my mom again anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daddy.
Like this works just fine.
Yeah. So, and in terms of like the dad throughout the first act, he's way more in the book, for sure. Like, he plays
different presence in the book too.
Different presences in the book. In the book, he's noted as more of like, he's like dead inside in the book.
Yeah, he's just beaten.
He's beaten, he's done. He has 5 daughters. He has a wife he doesn't actually love, which in the movie, he's portrayed as loving her.
Very different relationship in the movie.
Yeah, he's more likable to his wife.
Yeah.
Especially when they're in bed at the end we'll get to that. But like, he's not as pathetic in the movie. Yeah. Especially in the second act when he comes in to save Elizabeth from the proposal. Yeah. And he's just like, he still evokes a, if you get married to him, you won't see her, and then you won't see me if you do. Yeah. Good? Okay, I'm going to go back to my office. Yeah. Like, he's still like a step back in the story, but he's, I think, more likable in the movie.
Well, yeah, because it's and they bring in that like Donald Sutherland has such an easy charm, very calm demeanor, and he's a good choice. Again, I think for what they were doing, but he's also he's far less passive in the movie. Like there's the moment later on, without giving too much as we discuss it, when eventually they have to rush to London to help Lydia, eventually they have to coax him into going. He doesn't even want to go.
Oh yeah, in the book he's like, do I gotta go? Yeah. Your daughter's gonna be ruined. Well, but really? Yeah. Like, I have 4 more. Yeah. Like, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. He's more passive and he has given up. And I think they would have done that the same in the movie if they had more time. Yeah. They condensed, I think, him as a character because of the time. I don't think it was because of the story.
Well, and there's the other story element that feels all technically there, but it's been passing over from Act 1 to 2 is the George Wickham subplot.
Oh yeah. Which
is so critical as an example of how you revise something for film. Mm-hmm. Because they are much more, Elizabeth and Wickham are much more conversant in the book. They have a number of interactions. Whereas here, it's some of that is present, but some of that is indicated by passing glances in the hall. There's the same nuts and bolts of the storyline where Mr. Wickham simply wasn't deserving of the estate that Darcy's dad had left to him, but he's turned it into a story about his own woe and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Is such an interesting one to look at and say, well, if we're doing a 2-hour movie, we just need this to create conflict with Darcy. It's more important to create conflict with Darcy for these 2 hours than it is to explore
the relationship.
That complicated of a thing where it's like he's a regimental soldier going off to fight Napoleon, which is fascinating, and they how the having that battalion near town is such a stimulating thing for the youngest daughters who were like,
well, it is. You can tell her dad is so tired of this kid in the book and the movie.
Oh yeah.
Where he's like, oh, God, let her go to Brighton. Yeah. I don't care. She needs to. She's up a peg or two, man.
She needs to be taken down. Yeah. So I just saw Companion yesterday, and the man who plays Wickham is in Companion.
Rupert Friend, who's great.
Yeah, and I was like, that's Wickham. I was in movies, and my boyfriend was like, who? I'm like, he's Wickham from Pride and Prejudice. And I was rewatching parts of it this morning while I was eating my breakfast.
Yeah.
I was like, he's on the screen. Wickham's right there.
Yeah.
And they play completely different characters in both. And they do he's such a good actor, but the bones of the story in the second act with Wickham in the book, I know you haven't read Sense and Sensibility.
Correct, yeah.
But for me, that was a carbon copy of Willoughby from Sense and Sensibility.
Interesting.
Just another character, W is Wickham Willoughby. And I think that's the antagonistic outside character that she uses in most of her books. That is somebody who's outside of society, right? He's not in with the in crowd or even with the positive viewed country people. He's a soldier, and that gives him a little bit of rank, but without that, he has nothing.
Yeah.
And same with Willoughby in Sense and Sensibility. Like, he is a gentleman, but he has no redeeming qualities whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's not a fact of, oh, being a soldier or being a gentleman is enough. It's not enough.
Yeah.
And gambling issues and money issues. And
there's another great line where it's, I think I actually have that in my notes here. I kept a running total of like notes that from lines that I think are just incredible. Handsome men must have something to live on as well as the plain.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth gets off some real scorchers on dudes. Where it's like, and later on she said, stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all, because everything else has to come down to like debating whether their positive qualities are positive enough or correct for you or right for your temperament, or like in terms of marriage, everything comes down to that. And she's just like, I'd rather know just stupid guys, so I don't care.
Talks to Jay's like, you know, money a stupid person.
Yeah.
Everybody, you're so nice. And she's just so judgy.
Yeah.
In the second act specifically, she's like, oh, Mr. Darcy insulted me by saying I was passable, basically.
Yeah.
Dance partner. Fuck him. Bad impression. And then she's asking him when she's visiting her sister in the second act while she's sick. She goes to visit her for like extensive time.
Yeah.
That like, oh, what's your fault? Oh, if someone faults me, I have a hard time. Like, I hold a grudge.
Yeah.
Basically, he like, if they insult me, I hold a grudge. And it's funny because she does the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
And the same people, they're two the same train on two different tracks.
Yeah.
They're just like doing the same thing. And as a woman, I'm like, I see a lot of Elizabeth Bennet in me. I'm like, yeah, he hurt me. Fuck him.
Sure.
And then Grammy's like, oh, she's a skank. Fuck her. But then turns out like, no, maybe it was just one mistake or like one thing that happened, and like moving past those little singular moments of negativity, because there could be something great.
Well, there's the letter that I think maybe the most important element in the story is the letter after Darcy has proposed to Elizabeth Bennet.
In second act, that does happen.
In the second act, there's obviously the frustration because Wickham has fed her the lie about Darcy and Darcy's family and how they've treated him. And at the same time, the what was supposed to be an engagement between Bingley and Jane has imploded, and they couldn't figure out why. And she's given half the story about what went down between Mr. Darcy and Caroline to an extent with Caroline Bingley.
With Caroline Bingley?
In the role that she played in sort of talking trash about them.
She's a backstabber.
So, but that all played, so she gets the lowdown, half the lowdown on what went down with the implosion of the relationship, finds out that Darcy played a role in it. And then Darcy writes the letter after she turns him down to be like, okay, you've heard some things, I'm just going to tell you what's what. And while the second thing with Wickham is quite clear, I mean, Wickham's he's a douchebag.
Yeah.
And he's
horrible.
He's lying because he needs to preserve whatever image of himself he needs to survive. But the first element where they're discussing how he didn't think that Jane was as sincerely heartfelt as Bingley was, even though that wasn't the case, that it was an error of judgment on his part. There wasn't bad intent. He was trying to protect Bingley, his friend, from heartbreak, and talks about, and you find out through some fun shots in the movie what a dependent friendship that is for Bingley. It's actually pretty sweet how much Darcy seems to fear for Bingley's judgment, and is a very protective guy, and he knows that this guy's a bimbo and like he's pretty, and he's a bimbo and he has money, and so he's like, all right, here's what you're gonna do, and like it's that was an important element for Elizabeth to have to absorb, was to think, well, yeah, but he's worried about Bingley in the way that I'm worried about Jane. And like that's, you have these conflicting sort of arrangements hit head on. And that to me is the conflict of the movie in a nutshell. Is how do you look at a situation and divorce yourself from your pride and your prejudice,
your first impression,
to really absorb a full situation. And it's kind of beautifully placed in the story. Man, Jane Austen's really good.
Oh, she's baller.
She's excellent.
I love Jane Austen.
Yeah.
A huge difference in this whole section of second act between the book and the movie is the time that she spends, and also how the marriage of Mr. Collins and her friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is what's her friend's?
Charlotte Lucas.
So Charlotte Lucas ends up marrying Mr. Collins because she's a little bit older than Elizabeth, and she knows she's going to be a spinster. She doesn't have options, doesn't have prospects. Her dad is a lord, so she is like more well connected than Elizabeth is.
Yeah.
But in the book, it is way more drawn out on like her interactions with Mr. Collins, her like, oh, like he visited me, and like I've been courting for 3 weeks, and my family's mad, and it's fine, I'm marrying him. And then after they get married, then Elizabeth goes visit them, and that's when she meets Mr. Darcy again.
Yeah.
And then she's spending time there when the proposal happens, and she's by Lady Catherine de Bourgh because they're at the rectory of her estate.
Yeah.
She's nearby to that whole echelon of people.
Rosings
Hog.
Yeah.
But I think that whole dynamic of Charlotte and Collins is very different and very important in both.
Yeah.
Because Charlotte Lucas is pragmatic. She's like very knowing of her situation.
Yeah.
She said, I need to marry him, and I don't like him, but I'm going to do it.
And she's like, I don't care really. That was the biggest thing for me in the book. It was like, she's just like, I don't care. Like, I know you got an affection thing, but like,
I have no options thing.
Yeah.
So like, we're just going to do this.
Yeah.
And in the movie, it was portrayed more as a slight. Like she was worried and about Elizabeth's impression of her as a person by marrying Mr. Collins.
Yeah, 100%.
In the book, it was not really skirted over, but it was more understood.
Yeah.
That's why it was happening. There's the cinematic swing scene where she's...
Terrific shot.
The time lapse using a swing was beautiful. And then there was the fight, and then after the swing time lapse, then she goes to visit, and she gets a letter like, hey, visit me, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The time of Rosings is a huge chunk of the second act, and a lot of info is given, and one of the characters that is different between the two would be, could you guess who's the character that's very different between the two at Rosings?
God, I'm trying to think. Her daughter, maybe?
Colonel.
Oh, Fitzwilliam. Yes, Fitzwilliam. Yeah.
Fitzwilliam is a huge different character in the book and the movie.
Yeah.
And I think in the book, he plays a more vital role to that story. Like he is...
Oh, yeah. You're 100%
he's a
right.
heavier player.
Yeah.
But the story that is portrayed in the movie, he's not as necessary because they do it more visually.
Well, that's the thing is my last impression of him was the movie. And he's such a slight presence in the movie.
He's in one drawing room and one church scene.
He's just there to feed her a line.
That's it.
It's just a Shakespeare device.
In the book, he is a main player at Rosencrantz Park.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
You think that he's gonna maybe even get engaged to Elizabeth. Like they're pushing them together, and then Darcy like comes in and he's like, no, I love you. And in the book it kind of seems like, oh, he starts to realize more of his feelings for Elizabeth because Colonel Fitzwilliam is showing interest.
Yeah.
That's what it comes off for me.
Yeah.
As like, oh, he's loved her, but like he's more willing to overlook their societal differences because some other man is interested as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. He wants something that someone else wants.
Yeah.
Right? So, that's, I mean, we're kind of morphing plot and character together, which I think is working.
Sure.
But, yeah, that man is one of the characters that I think was almost completely cut from the movie.
Yeah.
I think they threw him in there just as a little plot device.
Yeah, 100%. He was just a Shakespeare throw-in of like, I need some way to generate conflict going into the next half of the movie.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of the second act, going into the third.
Yeah.
And Lydia, one of the second to youngest, right? Or she is the youngest. Yeah, she's the youngest.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So it's Lydia, then Kitty. They're very close together.
Yeah.
Mary's 3, Elizabeth's 4, Jane is 5.
Yeah.
Those are the 5 daughters.
Yeah.
So Lydia is the youngest. And she goes off to Bath with a military guy and his family.
Yeah.
As like a vacation of sorts. And she disappears.
Yeah.
Without it. What the heck? They're trying to trace down what happened to her. It turns out she's with who?
Mr. Wickham. My dear Wickham.
It's so interesting because in the book, they play out the subtle kind of interest in Lydia more than the movie.
Yeah.
There's like one glance between Wickham and Lydia in the movie that you're like maybe questioning, but they set up the potential for that relationship way better in the book.
Yeah, well, because they make it more about showing the opportunism of Lydia at that time, and about like it's a great way to include the appeal of the regiment as an extra social pressure on these young women living in this town to be like, yeah, there's another option for marriage there. A bunch of handsome men, so heartbroken when they leave and go north.
Oh yeah, it's like Lydia in the book was so, and they do it in the movie as well, but in the book was like, oh, I have a favor of John, and then no, John was last week. Charles, and then now she's on Wickham, and like you have to think like, oh, it's just the flavor of the week, right?
Yeah, right.
Because she's so immature. She's like 15.
Yeah.
So you also have to think that Wickham is a pedophile, which he is.
Yeah.
Because he did the same thing to Darcy's
Georgiana.
Georgiana Darcy. He did that to Darcy's little sister, which is the whole crux of why he finally fell fully out with Mr. Darcy.
Yeah.
Because he came back wanting money and trying to seduce his little sister.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, do you think that Mr. Wickham and Lydia, they're running off together, and just the fact that she's the same age as his sister, and it was very reflective on what could have happened in him. Do you think that was a catalyst to finally like admit his feelings for Elizabeth?
For Darcy to admit his feelings?
Yeah. So he could, like, he went into action, obviously, because it was so similar and he wanted to protect. Maybe was it for Lydia's sake or Elizabeth's sake?
That's an interesting idea. Let me think about that for a second.
Because it seemed to me that like he would do it anyway because he loves Elizabeth, but he was so willing to overlook everything at that point. Was it for 100% Elizabeth, or was it because the situations were so mirrored?
My impression was that it had to do more with Elizabeth.
Gotcha.
I think that was my impression. And I feel that way because of how blindsided he seems to be by the Wickham discussion in their relationship.
Gotcha.
Because he didn't even think that was a factor. So I think that his relationship to Wickham obviously is such that like they're aware of each other's presence.
Yeah.
And I think, here's the thing, I'll allow it that on some level, probably seeing Wickham indicate interest in Elizabeth may have informed that to a certain extent. But I think I don't think it was the better part of his passion yet. I think a bigger part of that was getting over the propriety of her family. Yeah.
That was one of my that scene. I actually did that scene in college in one of my acting classes when they're like, my inferiority of birth
Yeah.
I overlooked your inferiority at birth, and I can still say I love you. And she's like, well, thank you for saying that you love me despite this, and this.
Yeah.
But like,
well, fuck you very much. Yeah.
Fuck you very much. That whole speech was so amazing, and they almost did it carbon copy to the book, to the movie. Like, that whole scene didn't really change. But what did change was the situation of the Lydia cleanup.
Yeah.
I said the Lydia cleanup definitely changed a lot between the two.
Yeah.
So
the Lydia super fun site.
Yeah. So basically, Elizabeth's dad and her uncle, who is also a character in both, have to go rescue
Mr. Gardner. Yeah.
Mr. Gardner had to go rescue Lydia. And it is actually a bigger deal in the book that Mr. Gardner is a tradesman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Oh, no, he's a lawyer. Yeah. So the fact that he's a lawyer is like, he has a ton of money, but like, he's a lawyer. So like, he's not even on the same echelon as Bingley, who's in trade, but he's a merchant. So there's like, even within the scope of non-gentry people.
It's like D&D. It's like English upper class D&D.
Okay.
Well, I'm a paladin, so.
I'm a paladin, so I can't talk to you. It's like high school.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, you're the president of band camp.
Yeah.
Or you're the president of this club. Oh, you're a president, but you're still in that club, so fuck you.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah.
But like, to them, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't matter that he has money, but he's a lawyer, so it's distasteful to be a lawyer. They don't make as big of a deal in the movie. They don't even mention that he's a lawyer in the movie.
No, it's not. It doesn't really come up. They do tend to flatten out a lot of those differences, because I do think they really do specifically pick this as a story of simple conflicts in the movie. Mm-hmm. So when Wright and the screenwriter Deborah, who I want to look up, it's an interesting last name, Deborah Mogich.
Okay.
Director Joe Wright, I think when they approached this material, they were like, let's pare this down to the character dynamics almost exclusively.
What else has she written? Yeah, already.
So she is mostly a novelist. She has written Grandpa Works. I was reading about her yesterday. She wrote another novel, These Foolish Things, which was adapted into The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. So she has worked as a screenwriter, and she's written, I think, more novels. She wrote this, and she wrote in 2017 the teleplay to something called Tulip Fever.
Okay.
Which I have not seen, with Alicia Vikander, who I like a lot, Dane DeHaan.
Oh wait, I've seen that.
Also with Tom Hollander.
No, I've seen that. It's actually really good.
Yeah. So she wrote the novel and then adapted that as a screenplay, I believe.
That is so interesting, because that has like murder and like thriller. Like, it's so different. That's so fascinating.
I'm gonna have to check this out.
Yeah, it's actually really good.
Seems really appealing.
Vikander does a great job.
Yeah.
Hey, interesting. So coming into the third act, we're cleaning up the Lydia mess.
Yeah.
Right? And Darcy comes to the rescue, but we don't know that he's come to the rescue just yet. We get Lydia home with Wickham to visit, and I'm married, and she's showing off and flaunting her mistake.
Yeah.
Basically.
What's the line? She rolled down the window and took off her glove and put her hand on the edge of the window to show someone passing in a parallel carriage.
Her ring.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, you got that ring because you got saved. If you probably wouldn't have that ring. It'd probably just be ruined.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for someone else. But she's such a naive kid still that she doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like, she's a 15-year-old high schooler who's like, I got my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And he gave me a promise ring. And like, no, your parents forced him to give you his pin because you guys had sex. And
her mom is immediately fine with it because she's married.
She's done. She hit her goal. The mom's goal has been met for one of her children. And that's evident when, in the third act, Lady Catherine de Bourgh comes to the Bennet's home.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, was it at night in both?
So if I recall correctly, this is one of those situations where
that was made a bigger deal. Catherine's visit was made a bigger deal in the book.
Yeah.
They come there, they're touring the grounds, they're there to stay.
Yeah.
Like they're in the process of a visit, whereas here she steals away in the middle of the night and shows up at their place near Hertfordshire, and then like confronts her dead on. So it may have taken place at night, but in the novel, it's much more
built up.
There's decorum to it as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In the movie, it was definitely very abrasive of
incredibly emotional. Yeah.
The melodrama aspect. It wasn't like satire.
Definitely not how I read that taking place in the book. And it became an important scene for me to understand the choices they were making, where it's like in the book, this is about Elizabeth's calculation against her, essentially to plead the fifth, to not perjure herself against whether or not she has an opinion of whether Darcy will propose to her after all.
Yeah.
We'll try again.
Yeah.
And because she says, no, we're not engaged. I'm engaged. And then she's like, I don't know. I can't say. I mean, if no one proposes to me, it sounds like he's already on to the next one.
Yeah.
So who am I to say? Like,
and for that whole speech with Elizabeth, I think it was more confrontational in the movie as well, because when she said, will you say yes if he asks you again? And it's like, or you will say no.
Yeah.
You will say no if he asks you again.
Yeah.
And she goes, I'm not going to do that. If he asks me again, I have the choice to say yes.
Well, she's incredibly evasive in the book.
Yeah.
In the movie, there's a lot more finality to her tone.
She's like, if he asks me again, I'm probably saying yes. It's
the
undertone of the movie versus the book of like, he's probably not going to ask me again. He's not going to ask me again.
Yeah.
I said no, basically. He never asked me.
Why would I comment on hypotheticals?
There's no point. Like, why am I talking? I'm not going to give you any answers because you don't deserve my answers.
It's great. It is really great how she really snaked out of that one. That's fantastic.
So I think it's more nuanced in the book
than
the movie for sure.
Yeah.
So we're coming on to, there's a lot of little individual scenes throughout this whole movie of like the interactions between characters, but the main plot thing is we go into Mr. Darcy does come to
the end game.
The end game. And
boss level.
We ultimately get another revelation or proposal.
Yeah.
From mainly the revelation first, and then he proposes.
Yeah.
And you think it would just stop.
Yeah.
It keeps going.
Yeah.
Because there's the little bits of pictures of what to do next. Like you have to ask my dad, you have to like figure this out.
Yeah.
Say yes, this is viable. And then they are repairing. Oh, they also had to repair the Bingley-Jane relationship, which I kind of skirted over.
That's correct.
Yeah. So part of Darcy's like reckoning of trying to get basically on Elizabeth's good side, I think, is to repair the relationship between her sister Jane and his friend Mr. Bingley.
Yeah.
And they do that by, I think he goes to Bingley and is like, hey, I messed up. I was wrong. She actually really loved you. Do you still love her? And then they throw those two fellows together and Bingley proposes to Jane. It's all happy. And then the aunt comes and then he proposes. So we missed that whole little...
This ending is like everything that happens in more steps in the book.
Yeah.
Happens in more stages than the book, because everyone is still operating in decorum. They're still operating within the rules of that structure. It's like watching a piece of legislation work its way through Congress, where like even at the end, it's so hard to get to the victory lap of like, well, we passed it. Well, no, we got to do this, and there's got to be an estimate, there's got to be this and this and this, because all of this is a system of verification. It's all verification.
There's still some wiggle room for them to be ridiculous.
Sure.
Like they can, the mother, for example, if you're going with the legislative piece of material, a sentence probably would be from, oh, the breasts looked like this.
Yeah.
And the mom would be like, the boobies. You know, like you're still saying the same thing. You're still working through the same constructs, but you're skewing it and it's a little bit more ridiculous.
Yeah.
The ridiculousness that comes through those mistakes and changes is why Mr. Darcy was like, ooh, I don't really want to be connected to these people because they have no self-awareness of how ridiculous they're being.
Yeah.
And it's not even intentionally ridiculous. They're just being themselves.
They're just operating.
But they're not saying anything overtly out of the system.
Yeah.
Or out of, I mean, kind of actually. Now I'm thinking about it, like mentioning, oh, it'd be great advantageous marriage is on the front. Like, maybe you shouldn't talk about that.
Like it's soldiers coming back from France or something. Like it's you're talking about it like a current event. Like you are more excited about the achievement of this trophy, or satisfying this custom than you are about like appreciating, at the very least in the system, the dignity of what is about to happen.
It is. It's like saying, oh, this marriage is going to be great for our pocketbook versus I'm getting a great son-in-law.
Well, it's the fine line, because here's the thing. She's not wrong. Like that, she's not, and the people above her operate that way too. And like they marry off cousins before they're ever born, and they do that. Like, so it's all the horse trading is real.
But it's hush hush.
But it's hush hush because you're supposed to, again, it's all part of decorum and the filter that you draw over this process to make it seem more palatable to everybody.
Mm-hmm. And coming into the third act, I think it's very clear that those things are starting to be a little bit more recognized.
Yeah.
It's like by the dad, and the mom is funny because she'll be like, oh, I hate them for doing this to you, for like Lydia. Like, Lydia, she's lost forever.
Yeah.
I hate Mr. Wyckoff. Oh, they're married? Oh, okay, I'm good.
That was so funny in the book when she's like, oh, like, there's a great line that Austen puts in where she's like, she's possessed of like spasms and she's shaking it like she's being crucified. And then, it's the split second that they're like, they found her and they're getting married. She's like, well, would you look at that?
Lydia's getting married, baby. And then the same line from the book is in the movie when she's like walking down the stairs, like, when you have 5 daughters to occupy your thoughts, let me know if you have anything else.
Yeah.
Like, she has 5 daughters in a society where they cannot be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
In a respectable way. They can be servants, they could be whatever, they could be workers, they could be like prostitutes, but in a respectable society, her daughters have no options but marriage. So she's a great mom in that aspect, that she's trying to get her daughters.
Well,
but also, she has no tact.
Well, I also really do think that her portrayal in the movie is much more sympathetic. And they really tell it in the coverage too, where the way they shoot that line about 5 daughters is it's the like a medium shot with her and Keira Knightley, and Keira Knightley or Elizabeth really embraces her mother in that moment in a way that seems to signal forgiveness and a maybe a higher degree of empathy. But in the book, it's still pretty clear that she's like, my mom's crazy.
Oh, like this, she's nuts.
She's a crazy person. This is also the reason that my dad can't stand her.
Yeah.
This is miserable. Please help me. Please, someone help me.
Yeah. For sure.
But again, she's an operator in a system, and I think it is Elizabeth's tendency to judgment, where she's like, she takes the more cynical tack on her mom, and this is from her perspective. This is a novel written from Elizabeth's perspective.
I think it's because she's so much like her dad.
Yeah. You get why they're both tired of her.
Yeah. I think like the last two, their youngest daughters were more like her mom because they're immature.
Yeah.
The middle daughter, Mary, who she's not as bad in the movie.
Yeah, right.
But she's so annoying in the book because I
think she's funny in the movie.
She's funny in the movie. She just states the obvious. The intricacies, the moral whereabouts of everything is so interesting.
It's so funny.
A boiled potato is an interesting topic and you're like, shut the fuck up.
It's so good.
You hate her so much more in the book, but in the movie she's such a side. Like, some of the stuff she says is kind of funny, or like,
well, I can get what she's there for. She's there to be like, there's almost an absurdity to her being there at all. I was like, who the fuck is this person?
She's the middlest of middle kids.
Is this a real person?
But the Act 3, we end up finally confessing our feelings and getting engaged and getting permission, and we end on a high note. And everyone's happy and self-aware. That's pretty much it. That's
Well, and I think even here, so this is like, this is fascinating to me because the ending in the movie, there's the bewitched line from McFadden. You're like, you have bewitched me, body and soul.
nowhere in fucking Austen. Like, Austen wouldn't write something like that.
No.
That's not it. Like,
He's enamored with her.
Yeah, but
I have favorable tendencies towards your person.
yeah,
but it was.
This is like it's like a sixpence none the richer lyric. It's and here's the thing. All of that works fine in the movie. Everything about that because this is where the last acts, the conclusions are so different, where they really do play up the romantic element that exists between Darcy and Elizabeth in a much more critical way. It's ridiculous. Here's the thing. It's great. I don't care. Like, that's what's so good about this movie is, and I do not mean this as an insult at all, in terms of the tone and the emotional structure of the story. It is as though someone was doing fanfic set in the Pride and Prejudice universe.
Oh, it's great fanfic.
Where your impression is like, oh, the Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, they're so in love, and they're stuck on each other. And like in the book, they're like, yeah, I love you. Yeah, I think we'll have a good house together. Like, it's the flowing coats, him asking her in the movie what names he'll call her, and like one of them is like goddess, and it's like, no, come on, like get out of Dodge.
The book is so pragmatic.
Oh, incredibly, even to the end.
Yeah, it's so pragmatic. And then the movie, you're still getting to that same endpoint of like they're gonna get married, but it's gonna be like,
no, in the movie they're about to break some sculptures, if you know what I mean.
I know. Gotta be careful in that.
Yeah, in the gallery.
Things. But yeah, definitely the verbiage is very fanficky, and my boyfriend makes fun of me because anytime I watch this or something like it, or read a fanfic, or like read Court of Thorns and Roses, oh, are their hearts beating and not knowing why they're beating fast?
Yeah.
Like, there's the same tonnage. But it's so true. I don't hate it. I love that.
No, it's great because if nothing else, in working on this podcast, I think that the thesis that's developing is that a good adaptation isn't necessarily a one-to-one recreation.
Of course.
And in fact, usually shouldn't be. Because translating anything from story to visual medium, you're going to have to make decisions, especially if it's movie versus television. Mm-hmm. And they made a clear, concise decision to make this a much more romantic, melodramatic piece. And they followed through with it. And it works. It's consistent within the film.
I think it's more digestible to the masses.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, not everybody will read Jane Austen.
Yeah.
Some people think it's very hoity-toity.
Sure.
It's a classic, but it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
And the movie was definitely more digestible to a theater audience, to the 2005 audience at the time, for sure. Like, it resonated more with the society which we live.
Yeah.
Versus the book at that time.
You got to sell tickets.
Yeah.
And you got to do it in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the book was made at a time where that was their entertainment. Society was their entertainment. And they didn't have a visual medium to go to, so
unless you went to the city and you went to see the opera or the theater or something, but that's not something they're going to do with any frequency.
Exactly. And the trouble and struggle, yeah, is that everyone's imagination is different, and you can't do a one-to-one because everyone's individual.
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah,
there's no way that it'll be the exact same. But the ones that fail, the adaptations that fail, are the ones that try too hard to be the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
The ones that are successful are the ones that take the bones and make the visual, like Jaws.
Yeah, 100%.
Took the bones.
In fact, I think I was thinking about this because whereas Jaws the book was terrible.
Oh, awful.
And then you get a masterpiece out of that.
Mm-hmm.
You have a masterpiece here being translated to a different kind of masterpiece, to a very different, distinct thing on its own.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of transmutation, but for a very different reason.
It's like a photo turned into a painting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very same image or same basics, but different medium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to do characters and then overall impressions? The same questions we usually do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go over the characters that, because I can cut in between this and earlier. Let's go over the characters that were cut from book to movie.
Mm-hmm.
Why they were good cuts, why they were bad cuts.
Yeah.
Cut number 1. Bingley's sister number 2.
Yeah.
Gone. She's gone from this adaptation. And I think it was fine because She was just a figurehead and a sounding board for the main Bingley sister. She played no significant role. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that at the end of the day, you don't need her to establish the character dynamic as it relates to Elizabeth, really. It's an easy choice to make. And like Caroline is already such a concise
bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But she's already such a concise catalyst for the story that, yeah, you don't really need her.
Yeah. Second, we already mentioned was Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Correct. Seriously demoted.
Very demoted, and I think demoted for a good reason.
Yeah.
The Charlotte's father was also demoted.
The Lucases in general, because I think, and even Charlotte, they make that decision to make Jane the more important relationship to her, which again I think makes an incredible amount of sense, because you're de-emphasizing the social structure aspect of the story and emphasizing the heartbreak as an element. Yeah, I'd probably do the same thing.
Yeah, they took out the fact that he's a lord. He's the only lord in town.
Yeah,
it's a huge deal.
Yeah,
he's technically a higher rank than Bingley and Darcy.
Yeah,
but he's still ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they don't really point that out in the movie, I think, because then it would bring more of the societal conversation into it versus the relationship.
Yeah.
But the book did a great job of being like, yeah, so title is really important, but also this is a new title guy.
Yeah.
And he just got it.
Yeah.
He's still ridiculous. So he's still lower on the rank. Out of the lords, he is the lowest.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, because it's like anything else, like it was such a vast system that you're always going to have the lower end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Like it's like the armed services. You'll have officers, but if they're somebody stationed in some far off base in Alaska or something and they don't do anything, like, not to whatever. Anyway, but the point is, like, there is a hierarchy, there's a rank here that matters. So it's, on the face of it, Lord can sound impressive, but
it's
at the end of the day, yeah,
it comes with that decorum you also need as part of the title that you get through time.
Correct.
Versus, I just got it. So,
yeah.
Okay, so I think those are the main characters that were like demoted or cut, right?
The Phillipses, I think, also are not present in the movie.
Oh yeah, they're just mentioned as one of the 520 families that died.
So that's an easy cut.
Yeah,
you get rid of them.
Yeah, they don't really play. In the book, they played more of, I want to make them envious of us.
Yeah.
Than an actual, they were a target for a role, not the actual role itself.
Yeah. And again, like, if it doesn't do anything to serve the driving force of the story in the movie, the romantic stuff, that sense of that romance, that arc between Elizabeth and Darcy, then
gone, cut, nada. Okay. Those main characters, we've gone through basically characters throughout this whole thing. We named the 5 sisters, the main players, the role was, general plot. Like I said, there's spoilers in here, but we didn't actually go beat by beat. So I think you should still be fine.
Sure.
Overall, do you think this was a good adaptation, 0 to 10?
I give it a 10. Because again, I think it is, they chose a very different tone than the book, but it was to its benefit. And I think that's, with a movie, what I look for is a consistency within the story. And if they I think very wisely picked a track, and it was the romance plot, and they stuck with it, and it ended up being like a dreamscape. It really does feel like a dreamscape built off of this world that Austen created. And visually, it's just so incredible. It's just I keep thinking about when she goes and travels with the gardeners in the countryside, her eyes in the carriage in that sort of orange bathe in that sort of orange sunlight, transitioning to that shot of her at the edge of the cliff, like looking off there.
Yeah. Jesus,
like,
it's crazy. The piano on it,
heartbreakingly beautiful piece of work.
Like, it's gorgeous. So visually 10 out of 10.
Oh God, yeah. I
think you're totally right that the track that they took and they stuck with it was awesome. Now, as an adaptation from this particular book, I'm going to give it 2 different rankings.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah. Ranking 1, when compared to the book itself and the content we saw in the 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice, I give it an 8.5. It's not the same. We said that earlier on. It's not the same. It has the bones, it has the romance track, but it doesn't have the satire, it doesn't have the societal underpinnings as much as the book.
Sure.
I don't think that things need to be 1-to-1, but the tone was so different.
It was, yeah.
As a mirroring piece of work, not a true adaptation. 10 out of 10. This is the one 10 out of 10 you'll probably get from me.
Yeah.
Because they did such a great job of sticking to that beautiful romance track that like I said, I've watched this movie at least 5 times a year for 20 years. Yeah. So I see this movie a lot. It's one of my main sick movies. I don't get sick of it.
Yeah.
So adaptation wise, I would probably get an 8.5. Mirroring wise, I would give it a 10. Visually, I give it a 10. 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Unbelievable piece.
How about what's your visual and your casting rating?
Well, again, this is where you talk about how different that Keira Knightley, not necessarily who I picture reading the book, but in the movie, she works incredibly well. She really does. There's a great shot when they go to Pemberley and they see the bust of his father, Darcy Sr., and he's such a statuesque, handsome guy, and the whole bit is that he's supposed to look exactly like his son. And it's kind of perfect that they are both such statuesque presences. We'll call them both statuesque beauties.
Yeah.
I think that Matthew McFadyen is like a very handsome guy.
He's handsome, but he looks
in a very specific way.
Yeah, he's not like traditional prince.
No, that's the thing.
He's very different. Yeah,
but a very, very, like they do both look like they would be statues on display. Like you look for these busts in a museum and be like, wow, what a piece of work. Like, so I think that she's perfect for what they're doing, where it's like everything is sort of archetypal and very much of a presence. I love Rosamund Pike. I think she was fantastic as Jane.
She reads the audiobook for the latest iteration.
Yeah.
It's very good.
And like incredible. Also, Rosamund Pike in general is terrific. Sutherland, amazing presence as the dad, even if they sort of deviated from the book's presentation of the guy. I think the version that he strikes is pretty much on the ball. I think everybody's pretty good. I don't have a complaint about anybody in terms of casting.
I love that I saw them so early on in 2005, and most of these actors have gone on to do very different things.
Yeah.
They got this, and then they got on to way different things. So
Carey Mulligan
Kitty,
as
Kitty, and then Lydia, she's in a
Jenna Malone. Yeah,
she's in a bunch of stuff. The only one I couldn't really find is Mary. Mary did anything different.
So I was thinking Tallulah Riley,
that's a cool name.
Milburn, a very cool name, and she's worked. She's done some TV. She had a role in Thor: The Dark World.
Okay.
Westworld. She was in Westworld, I believe. Interesting. Married and then divorced from Elon Musk, apparently, according to Wikipedia.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
No, what?
I'm looking for second confirmation.
She was one of the Elon Musk ladies?
Apparently.
That's crazy.
Hold on. I got to confirm on a second source because this is explosive.
This is so exciting.
Oh, man.
That we made a connection to current politics of Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. Interesting.
Was she like the second one? I know there's been like 5 or 7. No, listeners, I'm gonna say this now. We don't support him. We just find that this is very interesting.
Look, it's an interesting fact. Much like the regiment being prepared to go fight Napoleon, we found an interesting historical parallel. Or an interesting fact here.
But the third most weird, annoying sister in the middle.
In fact,
was
interesting
with Elon Musk. Okay.
Fascinating. Anyway, that's whatever. She's good. She's funny in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Overall ranking, cinematography, we already know 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Editing, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, mainly because like period pieces, I think you have to be more stringent with how you're editing and planning production because you can't have any slip ups. You can't have the Game of Thrones incident with the Starbucks cut.
Yeah.
You know, so things are usually more locked in with period pieces.
Yeah.
Along with animation. It just, you have to be very like honed in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I think that's it. Oh wait, what do you think this is going to get another adaptation?
Yeah, come on. Until we're all dead. Until
then,
and then a little bit after, probably.
What do you think? We already talked about who would want to direct it, right? That's a Stalin director.
Yeah.
Do you think, how long do you think that that's going to come before that comes to fruition, so to speak?
I would say
It's almost 20 years since the last movie adaptation.
I'd say pretty soon. I mean, I think we'll probably do. I think one of the streamers will probably do it.
Yeah. So we had Pride and Prejudice and Zombies in 2016. That was the last.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, we spoke earlier about the different versions of this that have been made. And like so many different versions of this have been made. Like the miniseries. Oh yeah. Obviously is I think the consensus in terms of accuracy, in terms of book to book TV, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I've watched every single one. I'm not even exaggerating. Yeah. That I could get my hands on for this for an essay I did. Yeah. The 1995 Colin Firth one is the most entertaining and accurate. The 1970s version is the most accurate. Okay. Boring as fuck. Yeah, I'd imagine it would be. Yeah. It's so. Well, that's the trick about adapting this is that, again, it's as a primary source document, it's a fascinating thing to read someone from this period of time writing so concisely about this. Mm-hmm. But you have to find a way to make that appeal visually. Mm-hmm. But then I also think that this isn't the first time that someone's approached the material, I think, in a way that was felt to sort of modernize it or make it appeal to a more modern audience. The Lizzie Bennet Diaries, the web series on YouTube. That was so good. I love it. I watched it, a little bit of it. Yeah. And I do think that it is, again, this is a book because it's a classic that lots of different people projected different approaches to. And it does, when you do that, the flavor of that society really informs the story because so much of the story is based on the social fiber that the characters exist in. Mm-hmm. It's more relatable by changing it a little bit than keeping directly to source material. Well, I think that's why they picked that tone for the movie, which is like people can relate. It is, at least we tell ourselves it is more common than not that we marry for love than for social convenience, although that is still very much an important thing for a lot of people. And has different standards in all kinds of cultures. Like it's a thing. Marriage as an institution is so different in so many broad ways across the entire world. And so, yeah, as soon as you put it anywhere else, it changes the flavor of the story. Exactly. So I don't think we're going to get a true to book adaptation. They might do another miniseries, update the miniseries to get a little bit more time to play out like 8 hours versus like a movie. But I don't think we will get a true one-to-one adaptation movie for this ever. Yeah. I just don't think we will. I think if they're going to do it more towards source material, it'll be a miniseries again. Like they're re-upping Sense and Sensibility again for a TV series. If I were doing this again in a modern fashion, I would do it as a miniseries. And I would actually have even more interest in someone like Iannucci approaching this from that standpoint. Iannucci with a Gerwig script would be, I think, fantastic. Oh, yeah. Really interesting. Win all the awards. Yeah. Run too many seasons, start to hate it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Trend of TV. But that first one, the first episode's perfect. Perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, folks, that's Pride and Prejudice. Kelsey. I'm Eric. And check us out on Instagram for socials. So, yeah, Adaptation Pod on Instagram. We have Zencast, which is where this is posted, but it's also wherever you listen to your podcast. I pretty much post on everything. Like, follow, review. That'll really get us up on the listing so more people can listen to us. We can keep creating for you guys. So thank you so much for coming along on this journey. Thanks, guys. It's great to be back and talking with you guys. We will see you next time. Bye. Bye-bye, guys.